Nua's heart immediately raced and her eyes snapped open when she awoke to feel the hand on her breast. No! She cried inside her mind when she felt her nakedness in the form of a male body nestled against her from behind. Then it all came back, the sleepy fog of dreams lifted like the morning haze, her eyes eased close again, far slower than they opened a moment before. Am I? Was that a dream too? She asked herself, and reached up to touch her throat to find her collar was gone. The skin there wasn't exactly smooth, the long years of wearing leather and metal against her, sometimes loose enough to be forgotten, sometimes so tight that every swallow of food reminded her of her status, but now it was gone. He kissed my throat, a human. It was two humans who saw me set free. I never would have imagined that. And yes, all that really did happen. She interlocked her fingers with his and closed them together, then felt his body stir against her own. Good morning, he said to her, and she made to roll onto her back while he gave her space. Nua half expected a lecherous face. The existential dread of finding a second Lord Hodge came up. And then was gone. There was only care on his face, his rough brown beard framed a tender smile traced out of his lips. Are you okay? He asked, and she relaxed, inching herself closer to him. She put a hand up to his chest and traced her palm over the skin there. Her ears gave him a teasing wiggle. I am, and so are we. But before we go any further, there are two things I need to know. He kept silent, waiting in expectation. Last night, I know you. You felt by touch what I've always kept hidden. The entire point was to make it so ugly that I prefer to be on my back. So ugly even some overseers pitied me and were relatively gentle in their overseeing me. I can never get rid of it. It's part of me now. If you really want me to stay with you, before we have to part, and I speak for the Allfather, and maybe after when things are peaceful, I have to know you can look at me without revulsion. If you can't, nothing about last night changes. I'll remember it happily. If you can, she sighed, fuck, I'm just rambling. She cursed herself and flung the blanket aside and rolled to the left over onto her belly so that the entire back of her body was exposed. The flesh ripped up and down her back had become just what his touch told him, mountains and valleys of bulbous, ridged scar tissue. Nua lay her head on the pillow and looked away from him, toward the door to the room. Even Elon didn't like to look at this, she said in a still, quiet whisper. Most of it. Hodge did, most of it. But not all. No, not all. I was always good. I never fought. I just wanted to be happy. This is what made him happy. Now this art of his is his legacy, she said, and groaned. I'm rambling again. Fuck. She felt his hand on her back, his fingers spread open, tracing over each ridge and valley where flesh and bone had once torn open, only to heal with slowness and pain. Raymond? She asked, and then closed her lips, when she felt his. His lips kissed a ridge over her back, and then the valley beside it. You don't. Wait? Nua's ears went down. You're not one of those perverts who get off to the grotesque, are you? She asked. She felt him laugh as he straddled her lower body. It shook the bed a little, and another little kiss came down to another mark. No. No, I'm not. But this is just an unkissed part of you, an untouched part, whether it is here, or not here, can be taken away and renewed, or is yours forever. It's part of you now. So of course he stopped, and kissed another spot. So you don't mind them? I admit I didn't expect this. Not even tears, or sympathy or? Nua's ears went down again. I'm not sure how to take that. I've got a fair few myself. I was a black scripture, and scars mean strength. Scars mean you survived. We of the black don't mind scars. I'm not a pervert, as you put it. But this, he traced his hands over her hardened flesh, is strength proven. And for the rest, would you really want that, from anyone, especially from me? He asked and flopped beside her again. No, I suppose not, Nua said and rolled away so that she could face him. But, as much as I'd like to stay and enjoy you more, you were sent here to watch the fighting in the arena and learn about whoever would become the new emperor, not to lie in bed all day drinking wine and being debauched. Raymond laughed when her ears wiggled in opposite directions of one another, a crude imitation of thrust and counter-thrust. I suppose not. He answered. We'll go and observe, and when the time comes, we go our separate ways, for a little while at least, Nua said and put her fingers over his lips just as they began to move. Their eyes bound each other as if by magic. But whether we meet again or not, I know I want to. However, there was the second thing. She added a second finger to the covering of his lips. The man you call a friend, he is a monster. It wasn't even about enjoying what he did. For him, it was a religious duty to make sure I was broken. He will never let your country change, not as long as he lives. Kill him. Kill Cardinal Dominic. Give me his head on a silver platter, so that there is only one man alive who knows my body. Will you do that for me, human who says he loves me? Nu asked and brought her lips close to his, dragging her fingers down from his lips to allow him to speak again. No cardinal has killed another cardinal in 600 years. Does she know what she's asking me to do? He wondered, but he could see in her eyes that she did. Are you asking for it as a wedding gift? Raymond asked. She was silent. Your faith prohibits you from marrying me, she argued. I gave away my soul already, Raymond answered, and then pressed, or do I ask too much? Even by human standards. That is hasty? Nua felt her breath cast every word with the haste of a stone from a sling. If I'm going to go as far as that, there is only one reason good enough, and life is short, maybe even shorter than usual for someone in my, no, our positions. So, your answer? He asked her. Nua gave a tiny nod, then covered his lips with hers and ruined their plans to leave bed quickly. The fights went on and match after match, though few of the bouts were lethal. Kalka saw none of them. I let this happen. I shouldn't have brought him, he might have planned this from the very beginning. He didn't just die, he died for something. The Wolf Queen came over to her and put a hand on Kalka's shoulder. He sacrificed himself to promote the strength and will of your country. And what a promotion it was. Queen Draudilin remarked, no set of cheers has been as big as that one, not yet. He helped you avoid my fate, be grateful to him. Grateful? Kalka asked, looking up and casting an angry gaze toward the Draconic Queen. She's right. Albedo acknowledged, her hand lingering over her swollen belly. Before, your son would have been the scion of a broken kingdom rebuilt by a charitable marriage. People from as far away as the Beastmen Triumvirate have come here to fight and watch, and before their eyes, your man showed that his homeland produces stubborn, worthy warriors. If not for his sacrifice, people who spoke of your kingdom would only speak of it as a broken place that barely survived a war against itself, whose soldiers would surrender to save their lives. I don't believe they'll speak poorly of your country now. Heinz remained studiously quiet, so much to learn still. So much to learn. He kept his sigh confined to himself and did the one thing he could think to do. He agreed with the others. They do sound right, I think. He assumed, and finally found his voice. They're right, he said, as our lord no doubt knew. The Golden Queen added in. Sad as it is, it had meaning. She reached up and dabbed her eyes with a little white cloth, appearing to all those present as if she were a distraught young girl mourning the sorrow of a friend. He could be restored to life, but Heinz shook his head. No, he wouldn't want that. Being satisfied with the end of your life, knowing that you went out for something you valued, that's a good fate for a warrior, a good end, a good death. Naya argued, maybe honor him instead, give him a statue, or a holiday. I've been toying with the idea of creating a holiday in my kingdom, a few of them really, now that things are settling down. Or name a beer after him and make it free to all paladins. Naya smacked her lips at that suggestion, and it was absurd enough that a tearful laugh followed the dragonid's idea. I will give you what you need to build a statue in his honor, if that is what you wish. Heinz offered, and Kalka went quiet as she thought it over. I'd like that, and I think he would approve of that much at least. Brain felt a vague tingling in his body, a steady pull, weak, but persistent, as when Layali wanted him to go somewhere or see something. I'll be right back, he said, and tousled Layali's hair. He then leaned over and kissed Zeshi on the cheek and was halfway away before realizing what he'd done. I wonder if she's blushing? He felt a giddy smirk come over him, despite having made love multiple times. It was little things that seemed to throw her off. He was 100 paces more before he wondered where he was going. Am I being controlled? Compelled? No. No, I'd know if that were the case. That kind of spell feels very different. I feel different. The tingle seemed to guide him on, prickling over his skin when he made a wrong turn, until he found himself reaching for a door to an isolated room deep in the undercroft of the arena. It's open. Come in. A young girl's voice relayed, and though he closed his right hand around the hilt of his sword, he turned the bronze handle of the oaken door and entered the room. It was what one expected of a room meant for trainees to prepare, wash, and recover. Fountaining water flowed from the stone in a constant pace like a slow-moving river, its babble echoing everywhere, from pillars and benches to walls and back again. Sweat and blood mingled in places that were not as well cleaned as one might have hoped, and it frankly smelled like sweat and fear inside the room. In front of him stood a young woman in red and white, with a wooden practice sword at her side and a girlish smile on her face. "Hi, I'm glad you made it," she said and waved a hand as if greeting an invited friend. "Wait, I know you." "Did you?" He touched his hands together, feeling the tugging, tingly sensation there. "Did you call me here?" Brain asked as the fog lifted. "I did. You might say I'm a friend of Layali's. Or you might say that I'm the woman who will give you everything you want in the world, or you can call me Oriole, if you like. Will you listen, or will you draw that thing and have me demonstrate to you that it is useless without my help?" she asked, waving a relaxed hand toward where he still held the hilt of his blade in a tense grip. He removed his hand. "I'm listening," he said, and her smile lit up. She clapped her hands together before replying. "What a marvelous decision. You can have your heart's desire. In exchange for your soul, your loyalty, and your everything, give what Layali and Zeshi have already given, and you will get back so much more. Or refuse, and then, you know?" she asked, while his brow furrowed in thought. Volume 7 C 120. From deep within the undercroft they could still hear the cheers of the crowd as the elimination rounds went on, but Brain heard them only as mere background noise. His eyes were focused instead on the woman in front of him. "What do you know about my Layali?" he asked. His eyes narrowed dangerously, but he kept his hand away from the hilt of his sword. "I know she can't die, but she can bleed, she can suffer, but she will always heal." Oriole raised her hand to stop him before he could speak beyond sputtering denials. She revealed it herself. She made a trade, an offer, to let herself be studied gently by the greatest minds in Nazarick, and in exchange we would ensure that her family would not only remain safe, but together. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked through gritted teeth. "What did you do to her?" "We had her hold crystals to absorb her mana, took flecks of skin, some strands of hair, and we gave her ice cream, cookies. We did take blood samples, but it was no more than a pinch, just a needle. If you ask her, she'll be eager for her next visit because we promised her a way to make ice cream drinkable." Oriole giggled a bit, her youth obvious, and bemusement disarming. Brain still had goosebumps on his arms, but he relaxed nonetheless. "The sticker on her cheek?" he asked as the realization hit him. "From one of our maids. She finds Layali to be very cute," Oriole explained, and Brain relaxed enough that he went to a nearby stone bench and sat down. Oriole Omega followed and sat opposite himself and went on. "You may die fighting Cerebrate, it's her greatest fear. What I'm here to offer you is not the throne, which you care little about. I'm offering you two things. The certainty of victory in avenging her, and something else." She leaned across the space between them and whispered, "A glimpse at the peak. I can unlock your potential, you will have your victory. Then follow me to my homeland for a few hours each day. You've heard of our team's work in the Draconic Kingdom, I'm sure. We shattered their limits in days, and all we ask for is your soul. Give your devotion to the generous god, Einsulgaun as the others have, and we will show you the way to heaven, not after death, but in the here and now." "How do I know you can do what you say?" Brain asked, his suspicion mounting by the moment. "Because we did it with Zeshi already. Though she will weaken back to her current state, unlocking her potential was only temporary. But after your fight with Cerebrate, if you excuse yourself, we will make a permanent change. The unjust limits you've always had," she snapped her fingers, "gone, just like that." "So Zeshi's performance." Brain rubbed the faint blue stubble on his chin, then raised his face again to look at the young girl before him. "I'm still more concerned with what will happen to Layali. I don't like the idea of her being used for experiments." "Nazarick bargains hard," Oriole Omega said, then reached out to take his hand in hers. "But our word is our bond. We will leave no marks but sticker stains, and she will be given every comfort. And I remind you, we have the power to simply take her if we wished. But she came to us, she made a deal. That I'm here and talking to you now should tell you that we're keeping it. Will you ever stop using her?" Brain asked with the steady stare of a protective father. Even I don't know what will happen, but, she squeezed his hand, I can promise that our discovery process will leave her unharmed. Also, she will be among the most protected people in the world, especially as the child of close supporters, Oriole said with a playful upturn of her lips. But suspicion still clouded Brain's thoughts. You're offering me a lot here, and in my experience when something sounds too good to be true, it's false. HMPF, Zess, she didn't even ask questions of me. You're a hard one. Oriole put her hands into her lap and looked down in a pout. She's an innocent still. In a lot of ways, she's used to taking direction and just going with the flow. I'm used to following only my own whims, and I'm used to people lying to me, Brain said with a casual shrug. HMPF. Then a taste. I will give you a taste that will last through your fight with Cerebrate. So you know what is possible. When you win, if you want what I'm offering, come see me again in this place. The Empire will be yours, Layali will live as a princess, you will promote the deification of our Lord, and we will keep you and all your descendants secure for as long as you are loyal, and yes, your true potential, your promise as a swordsman, will be given to you in exchange, Oriole said and stood up. Take it, or risk dying in front of your daughter's eyes, making all her work for nothing. Damn, you sound priestly enough. Fine, do what you're going to do. Brain groused as his nerves went on edge again. Curiously, there was no spell. Instead the red and white-clad maiden simply danced, gracefully sweeping her wooden sword in circles, her flowing robes fluttering about. For a moment he wondered, is this all some sort of twisted joke? Then he felt it, like a locked door in his mind being opened for the first time. Now that's interesting. Oriole remarked offhandedly as our dance came to an end. You've been a busy little bee, haven't you? It looks as if you had a few levels already in you, just held back by your body's limitations. I wonder if you'll get to keep those? She shrugged as Brain looked at his hands as if expecting them to be different. Go, face your enemy, and I will see you again soon, she said and pointed toward the door. Brain left in disbelieving silence. Everything about his body felt lighter, stronger, the tingle was gone, and unable to think of what else to do, he simply walked out without a word. Comes to see a beautiful young lady in private, has her dance for him, and leaves without so much as a farewell? How rude, Oriole said when the door shut, then laughed at her own joke and took her seat again to wait for his return. Brain blinked when he saw the sun stream through the little gaps in the cavernous opening beyond the undercroft. The sun is in the wrong place. No, it's setting. How long was I down there? He wondered. The fog on his mind was entirely gone, and the previous hours now felt like a dreamlike experience, recalled through mists. It was the sound of his name that drew his attention. Brain Ungleus versus Cerebrate. The call went up, and the crowd began to rumble. Shit, I don't want to be late. He cursed and set all other thoughts aside and passed through into fading light of day. We've seen some incredible matches here today, beastmen, trolls, elves, humans, orcs. Warriors of all kinds come to battle for the throne of an empire, and now we bring two adventurers together. They are the only humans to last this long. Now only one of them can carry humanity to the top. The crier exhorted the crowd, but Brain had eyes only for his prey. Cerebrate looked frankly bored, until his face lit up. He leveled his sword across the arena. It appeared to the crowd as if it was being leveled toward Brain himself, however as Brain followed the direction, it pointed toward Layali. He'd seen her. And Brian could see that Layali knew she'd been seen. She began to weep and cling to Zesh's leg. Brain's heart ceased to pump blood, it felt instead as if he was pumping pure, unfiltered hatred through his veins. If someone told me a year ago I'd be killing a man in an arena to avenge one little girl, before the eyes of her, my half-elf lover, and a crowd of beastmen, trolls, and the gods know what else, I'd have laughed, bought them a drink, and asked them to tell me another tall tale. But right now, this is my dream. To see her smile again, and to see him twisted in pain at my feet. Hatred settled over him like a shadowy cloak, and the power of his presence, made tenfold by the curious actions of his benefactor, drew Cerebrate's attention away from Layali. What, you know that little cunt? Cerebrate asked when he saw the way Brain looked at him after spying the look between the abuser and the abused. Cerebrate stopped and held her hand to his mouth. Oh no, wait. You're why she's alive. I thought for sure I lost her. Sorry I popped her cherries before you could get to her. But hey, a second-hand sheath will still hold a sword, he laughed, but Brain did not. Cerebrate could feel the murderous intent, and turned to put himself sideways toward Brain while the blue-haired swordsman took his position. She's just a half-elf with no family, don't get so upset, I won't even contest ownership, keep her, dispose of her, what have you, elves are kind of gross anyway with those pointy ears and all. Cerebrate knew he was rambling, but couldn't stop himself. His calm front was a facade. Come on, Brain, you don't really think I'm the same as I was? You got lucky before, and I left you with more injuries than I had. It won't go the same, you know it, just put up a good show, and I'll let you down easy, no need to get upset over getting a half-grown gash before you, Cerebrate said and leveled his sword ahead as Brain drew his own in turn. She has a family, Brain said, and right now, her father is going to kill you, her mother is going to watch, and she'll sleep well for the rest of her life when the worms are eating your corpse. Cerebrate took a half-step back, his face registering his surprise with a widening of his eyes and his mouth briefing forming a stunned O shape before he regained his senses. Is this idiot serious? It was very clear that he was. As Brain said nothing more, he only began activating his martial arts. Fine, I'll kill her father in front of her, maybe her mother later, and she'll beg for death before I'm done. Cerebrate taunted before using his own martial arts. That ought to set him on edge. He told himself, and when the signal came, he dashed forward. Knight's charge, he used his final martial art, I'll end it. Cerebrate never finished the thought, Brain was gone. The arena shook for 50 paces in every direction as Brain grabbed Cerebrate's wrist, snapped it, and then flung him down to the sands. The cry of pain did not get to leave his lips before Cerebrate felt his elbow snap, his knee turn to powder, and his foot go sailing away, while Brain's sword ran with blood when it was held overhead. This is the end. You hurt my daughter, you humiliated her, you made her want to die, and there's no forgiveness for that. His sword came down again, and the scream finally left Cerebrate's mouth. You never should have touched her, Brain bellowed down at his prey. It was not a man, it was a lump of meat, offensive meat to be disposed of. Each word was punctuated by a flawless swing of his sword. No blow was lethal, it just shaved away at flesh. Cerebrate tried to roll over, to crawl away. My sword? He wondered and saw it lying there, just out of reach. How can you use your sword without any fingers? Brain asked, and while Cerebrate wondered what he was talking about, his fingers fell away from his outstretched hand to land like little sausages in the sands. You don't get a warrior's death, Cerebrate. No honor, no glory, nothing like that. He stood beside the groaning warrior and with a casual thump of his boot, rolled his daughter's tormentor onto his back. Brain then thrust the tip of his sword into the sand, straddled and squatted down over the limp figure, and began pounding his fists into him again and again. Ribs cracked and broke. Cerebrate lost the power to moan when a brutal punch across his face shattered his jaw and sent it sliding away from his body, leaving a half-malformed face and eyes of wide-eyed horror. Rot in hell. Brain snarled, raised his fist one more time, and brought it down into Cerebrate's nose. The sickening crunch of bone and flesh was the only noise to be heard as it all gave way beneath the impact of Brain's hand. The brain beneath became a lump of mush, and Brain stood up. Viscera and brain matter dripped from his fist, which Brain raised in triumph. I think they had history. The crier shouted, emphasis on had history. They added, allowing for a somewhat feeble laugh as Brain snatched up his sword and walked away from the corpse, and back to enjoy the rest of the day with his family. After one brief stop. Volume 7 C 121. When Cerebrate died, Queen Draudilin felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd forgotten was ever there. That is a profound relief, but how could he lose so easily? Cerebrate was a powerful adamantite-ranked knight. It's hard to imagine he could be torn apart like a village novice. Husband, are you behind this? Calco asked, not with suspicion, but with admiration in the way she looked at him. He has the whole world on strings, Albedo said with pride and took his right hand as Calca grasped at his left. Yes, Power Lord's plan, that man is one of ours. Or at least he is now. You know of him? Albedo asked the two queens. She didn't wait long for an answer. Brain Anglaeus is a wandering swordsman. He travels from place to place searching for ways to refine his technique. He sells his services to get by, or trades them in exchange for new techniques. He visited my country several times. As warriors go, he is impressive, but until that, Kalka said and pointed toward the ruin of flesh being scooped up into a corpse sled, I didn't know how much so. Draudillan's face became dark, her jaw set as she answered, in my country he worked with our elite teams to drive out the beastmen. He left after coming to blows with the late Cerebrate. Evidently, she cleared her throat and shifted on her feet. He walked in on Cerebrate. Using the child of one of the refugees, they fought, and when I didn't punish Cerebrate because I needed him to fight the beastmen, he left. She let her eyes linger on the bloody meat of Cerebrate that was being hauled away, leaving nothing but a red stain in the sand as his memorial. She avoided looking at her fellow monarchs then, and added, I suppose he never forgot his grudge. Brain Angleus was not a good man as I recall him. He was a thief, a sometime murderer. We even suspected he had a small group of bandits waylaying some of our supplies at one point. But we could never prove it. It just happened to stop when he was hired. But I suppose even he had standards enough to be repulsed by Cerebrate. I see, Ein said, desperate times, desperate measures. He kept his answer short. It wasn't exactly approval, but Draudillan nodded along as if it were. At least it's finished, Draudillan said and breathed a sigh of relief. She reclaimed her seat, and waited for the next match to begin. I swear by my blood, my soul, my blade, that I will give true faith and allegiance to the Allfather of Nazarick, and his heirs, until there is nothing left of me to give, or until I am released from my vow by the authority of his line. Braim gave that oath without hesitation mere hours before, and since that time he'd followed her through a vortex in the air, then obeyed every dictate of Oriolomega without question, giving the final blow to impossible monster after impossible monster, then standing in a circle that made his entire world go white, blinding him completely for several seconds before he could see again. But after each session he felt his body grow leaps and bounds beyond its former state. How is this possible? He asked after shoving his sword into a fire elemental's dying body. This is Nazarick, Oriolomega said as she led him down the hall again for another session of the white. That doesn't really explain it, he said when he fell in beside her. It does. You just don't know it yet. But one day you will understand. The Holy Queen understands, the Draconic Queen understands, the Golden Queen, the Frost Queen, the Wolf Queen, and of course, those others we've chosen to elevate for one reason or another, they all come to understand. This is Nazarick explains every mystery you can imagine here. Oriol patted him on his lower back. This will be your last session. When it's all over, you will be allowed to meet your benefactor in person, all of you. You'll also meet your new peers. She chuckled a little bit when Brain asked, the other elevated warriors. And people say I am naive. Oriol answered, then shook her head to refuse to answer his question when he silently cocked his head at her, choosing instead to walk in silence. The last session of the white came and went, and before he could ask anything more, the whirling vortex appeared and she pointed toward it. I'm sure they're waiting, do hurry, she teased and gave him what she thought of as a gentle push, but which made him stumble through to the other side. He looked around and found himself in the room he shared with Zeshi and Layali. Before he could wonder where they were, the door opened, and Layali rushed over to jump into his waiting arms. Papa, she cried with happy tears. Thank you. I knew you could do it. She squealed and wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his cheek. You didn't come back after the fight, Zeshi said, then added, you had a little tingle, did you? He inclined his head toward his lover. I did, and I'm glad I did. But let's not worry about any of that now. We won't have to fight for a few days. We should enjoy ourselves. This is both of your first times in our winter. Let me take you to some of my favorite spots. It might have been a distraction so blatant even Zeshi could see it, but with Layali blinking her big blue eyes and pulling her pouty face in Brain's arms, and Brain evidently unwilling to say more, she caved. Fine, I swear, is there anywhere you haven't been? She couldn't keep the envious look from her face when he said, the farthest I've gone was the Devrian border. The Minotaur Kingdom may not look all that fondly on humans, but they like money as much as anyone else. When he saw her envy he added, don't worry, there'll be lots of time for you to see the world. We'll finish up here, and everything will change for the better, I promise. Zeshi didn't know if she could have argued, but when he went to the door and reached for the handle, she knew she didn't even want to try, so she reached the handle before him, and opened the door for them all. Volume 7 C 122. Nua watched as the tournament proceeded onward. Warrior after warrior fell, some perished, others did not, and many withdrew after seeing whom they would have to face. For 3 days, contestants were eliminated, with, to the disbelief of the crowd, included Raisinma, who fell before the Wartroll champion of the Baharuth Empire, who in turn fell before a nameless armored knight who refused to show his face, who in turn fell to the heterochromatic half-elf. There are some scary people out in this world, Raymond remarked when the knight yielded to the half-elf. Their clash resulted in shaking of the majority of the arena, and to his dismay, more than once, Nua prepared to dive over his body to protect him from debris if it should start flying. Yes, there are, Nua replied as the final match was announced. That blue-haired human was a surprise. What do they call that, a dark horse in the race? Yes, that's it, Raymond replied and watched the two take to the stands. Down below, he listened to a small shouting out. Go mama. Get papa. Go papa. Get mama. So they're a couple. I wonder if they get along? He chuckled a little bit at that. They must, or she wouldn't be cheering for them both. I've taken care of many human children in bad marriages, and they almost always pick a side. If she didn't, it's because the couple is on the same side. That should make things even more interesting, Nua said with a wolfish smile on her face. There's a predator inside this elf, just begging to come out. Raymond thought as he watched the expression on her face change ever so subtly. She's taller than the average human, and with that build, and even I rarely heard her coming. With the right training, maybe she would have been great in the Aganti, if she'd been human. Or maybe she could rise within a scripture. The gods know she's harder than a coffin nail. I wonder what I could do with her if I gave her a little training with a knife. It was a pleasant thought, tumbling with her to see what she could learn, though he forced himself to tear his thoughts back to the moment when he imagined doing so in the nude. Pervert. He mocked himself, knowing she would mock his thoughts if he voiced it. She looked across to where Brain stood facing her. You did a lot better than I expected, she said, not really listening to the crowd recollecting their victories. Not far away, surviving opponents became spectators to the last remaining combatants, but she noticed none of them. And you did every bit as well as I expected. Brain replied to her with a respectful bow of his head. Now here we are, the last two. One of us will win the title of the strongest, and that will be that. What will you do then? He asked, paying no more mind than she to the cries building crescendo. I don't know. I barely know how to run my own life, let alone an empire, but I can give Layali a better life than I had, and that's a place to start, she said. And you, will you go wandering again? Sort of. Brain replied and drew the long sword she gave to him. The red blade presented itself to her, edge first. I see. She answered, so that's it then. She drew her sword, and they heard the booming signal ring out over the arena. She barely stopped his sword in time. She blinked, he winked, and mouthed, you have beautiful eyes. Son of a. How did? There wasn't enough time for her to ask. His sword came down from overhead, and she raised her blade up to guard against it. Pain hit her knee as he forced her down to one of them. Sand flew up in every direction and the rumbling began in earnest. How did you do this? She grunted out the question as their blades pressed against one another, edging back and forth as strength contested against strength. She frowned when he mouthed something to her again. What in the world is power leveling? He winked and jumped backward, and for a moment they were a cacophony of voices as they pronounced their martial arts and summoned every skill they knew. They rushed one another across the distance of the sands. Clouds of the brown and blood-stained stuff sailed like waves of water behind them, rising in their rushing wake, until they reached one another, crashing like bolts of lightning in a duel. Their blades moving with such nightmarish swiftness that those who could see the motion, saw only well enough to know they were missing sight of most of them. After images and reflected light casting clangings of metal against metal and rumblings of the ground that spread to every wall of stone. The ground beneath them began to sink as clash after clash continued to scatter the sands away. The rumbling went harder and louder, until, to Zesh's shock, their swords cracked, broke, and the two blades sailed past each other's heads. Impossible, she whispered at his knowing grin. He raised his fist in front of his chest. Her heart raced with glee as she finally accepted the truth. It was a fight worth having. Her fists came up like his, and they cast aside the broken remnants of their blades. The crowd was on its feet, The cheers grew louder and louder as their punches and kicks flew back and forth at close range. Their battle cries came into harmony. Her hair flew wild and beautiful to behold in the eyes of every man and woman of war who ever loved ferocity and power in a single form. His steely eyes and shouts of battle fury inspired envy and desire in those who loved the clash of strength and will. Their hearts beat in time with one another as Layali cheered them on from the corners of their eyes. Bruises began to rise on their flesh, but neither one could fall. Pain was dulled by the arts they both knew. Before Brain's fist came in just a hair too fast, she felt it strike her cheek, and as she watched the ground pass beneath her as she sailed away to roll over the sands. The roaring of the crowd began to fade, dying by the time the last fleck of bloody sand fell back down from its previous skyward ascent. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. I lost. She asked herself with wonderment. Out of the corner of her eye she saw his hand come down, offering her a hand up. Hail to Emperor Brain Andleas I. The criers shouted, and the soldiers, warriors, and citizens screamed themselves hoarse. Brain, however, held his other hand aloft, calling for an end to the silence before those on the high dais of kings and queens could even rise to their feet to acknowledge him. She took his hand in hers, and hauled herself up when he braced himself. She grunted and rubbed her cheek where his fist connected, and before she could speak, she watched Brain fall.